January. Welcome to the January demo and meeting for the Minnesota Watercolor Society. Mary, do you have anything you want to get started on, or are we just going to turn it over to Vic?
I'll turn it over to Vic first, I think.
All righty.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Vic Perlbox here, the president of the Minnesota Watercolor Society. I want to welcome everybody to the meeting tonight and the demonstration tonight. Looks like there are 52 people on Zoom tonight right now. And what we're going to start with, before we turn it back to the demo, the bylaws of the organization require that an annual meeting of the membership be held to elect executive board members to a 2-year term. And so I'm going to open up by calling to order the annual meeting of the Minnesota Watercolor Society. The agenda item that we have is we have 4 candidates running for 4 positions, and myself, Vic Perlbox, I'm running for a second term as president. We have a vice president candidate, Susan Chambers, secretary, Nancy Geary, treasurer, Mary Schmidt. So these candidates, all 4 candidates have short bio statements that were emailed out to everyone this morning. I hope people had a chance to read through those. I think we have some well-qualified candidates. And so what, because we have 4 candidates running for 4 positions, I would like to make a motion that we approve those candidates by acclamation. And with that motion on the floor, is there a second?
I second that.
Is there any discussion or comment from the membership? If you do have something, make sure you unmute yourself. I'll give you a second here. All right, seeing no comments forthcoming, I would like to move for a vote. And what we're gonna do, because of the Zoom format, is we're gonna ask for members, anyone that's voting no on this motion, to make say no and unmute yourself before doing that. So I'll move to any members present tonight that vote no on the motion to approve those 4 candidates, say no at this time.
Years of teaching this stuff for the last 30 years, I've spoken in a lot of different settings. And speaking of the NFL, I was speaking for an NFL team. They do a thing called Christmas camp.
Again, I'll just repeat that. So if you're anyone that is voting no on the motion to approve the 4 candidates for executive board positions, say no at this time and unmute yourself prior to doing that. All right, so seeing no opposition to the motion, the motion passes and the 4 candidates are elected to the executive board positions. I congratulate all the candidates, and I'm really excited that this is the first time in a couple of years that all 4 positions are filled. And I look forward to working together with them on issues as we move into the new year. So there, on that note, I move to adjourn the annual meeting and turn the program back to Mary and Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you, Vic. And Mary, did you want to, we just had another little announcement to add to the end of that note to that meeting?
I can do that.
Yep.
My name is Mary Sauter, and Wendy Anderson and I are the co-chairs of programming for the Watercolor Society. And right now we need your help because our terms are up at the end of May, and we need to find 2 new people to take our places. The basic job requirements are planning the monthly meetings and coming up with the programs, which usually include demo artists, but there's lots of other possibilities too. This job is a fun way to meet new people and to meet artists especially. You get to work with some wonderful board members too. The job would be easier if you would sign up now and shadow us for a few months so that at the end of May, you could seamlessly work your way into the new year. And if you're interested in this or you just have questions about it, we'd like you to contact us through the Minnesota Watercolor Society website or through our emails on the latest newsletter. We know there's some very talented and capable people out there who could do a great job at this. So please volunteer to be programming co-chairs for next year. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mary. And again, we welcome everybody here tonight. And in just for the sake of everybody being able to hear, we'd ask that you would please mute your devices and then also turn off your cameras so that we will have better reception. So I would like now to introduce to you, for most of the people here, I'm sure know Sonja already, but I'm just going to give you a little brief bio of Sonja. Sonja has a fun-loving approach to watercolor, and her demo tonight is going to feature tips on how to approach these big blooms that you might dream of painting. For her, watercolor is where spontaneity and intention collide. I think that sounds really cool. Sonja's interest in watercolor was ignited through the invitation to paint at the Linden Hills Community Center in Minneapolis over 20 years ago. She served as the president of the Minneapolis Watercolor Society from 2016 to 2018 and served on the board of directors for 13 years from 2008 to 2021. Her watercolors have earned numerous awards in local and nationally juried exhibitions, and she's earned signature membership status in the Minnesota and Red River Watercolor Societies. Sonja teaches classes and workshops at the Minnetonka Center for the Arts, the University of Minnesota's Landscape Arboretum, and Hutchinson Center for the Arts. Her recent Human Spirit works express moments of kindness, joy, personal growth, and empowerment. They are unbound from a single person, gender, or race. They reinforce connections we share and depend upon for our own well-being. You can find Sonja's work in Studio 321 of the Northrop King Building in Northeast Minneapolis. So I'd like to welcome tonight Sonja Hutchinson.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so hello. I've got my demo set up so that it's going to focus on this big format work for you tonight. And okay, so you're asking me to join via audio. Okay, so I have to undo that. I have the audio on up here. Okay, so we have, mission control, we have a problem.
Okay.
My computer joined with audio. Does anybody know how I can do that?
I can't really hear you. I just hear some echoes sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've got 2 audios on and it's creating an echo. And so I want to stop the audio on my iPad.
Right.
Okay. Well, on here it's
If
off.
you click on your picture, I don't know if you can, you might be able to mute. We're looking for a mute there.
Nope, you have to join without audio, and I got a message to join on my iPad, and that screwed it up. So. What does it sound like when I talk? Are you just hearing a bunch of echo?
We're hearing
Yeah.
you plus echo. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I could do. I could just run it up my camera.
Yep.
And disconnect this other part. I won't be able to see.
That's okay. We can help you. We can help direct you with that. That's not a problem.
Let's get rid of this.
All righty.
Sorry, guys. We had this all set up, and then at the last minute, it blew up on me.
That's okay.
Okay. So I'm running a little blind now, but you can see this this work area. And what I want to share with you tonight is working on a large format, big blooms, and at the Manitowoc class, and there's going to be another to do a full day workshop. That echo?
Yep. Maybe if you move your iPad farther away from your phone and the other iPad. Or turn it off. I don't know.
That would help.
How's that?
Still doing it. Maybe move the other iPad.
So,
This meeting is being recorded.
all right. So, I wanted to share how you can work on these large format blooms with you tonight. And they can be extremely fun to do once you allow the water to do a lot of the work for you. And I'm going to show you what I mean by that. But before I get into that, I wanted to just say it's very valuable if you have a large support. So I've got this is what they make whiteboards out of. I've got this large board and it's lightweight. You can also use gator board, but I think this is a little bit less expensive, and you can get it at Home Depot, and they can even cut it down to size for you or one of the other hardware stores. So you want a large format support. And also for the palette, I wanted to introduce, I use these dishes that for my pigment. And the reason I do that is I can get a great big soupy amount of pigment in these dishes without having to go and scrub out my palette, my little dabs of paint, because you need quite a bit of paint to fill a shape and not have a lot of brush strokes in it. So you need your paint to flow, and that means having a lot of paint, a lot of water. It also means working with bigger tools. So I can't tell you how many times I'm in class and people working with brushes like this, and they're trying to fill in a sky, and they're wondering why they get streaks and brush strokes. Well, you know, it helps if your tools are bigger and can carry more water and create bigger washes for you when you're working in a larger format. And for some of you who routinely work in a large format, that's not news to you. But if you typically work smaller and you want to go bigger, these are things that are going to help you with that. So I've also got a large sheet like this. Oftentimes the pigment continues to move after you've laid it down. And so I've got an easel that allows me to set my board up in many different directions. and I'll give you a peek at that shortly. Because the pigment can continue to move after you've laid it down, even though it looks like it's gonna stay put. And so if you need to, go get a cup of coffee or answer the phone or whatever, it's nice to have a little easel that you can set up your piece in and let it dry. Let me just demonstrate that. You see my over there, Mary? Can you guys see my easel?
Yes, we can.
So this easel allows me to, let me adjust this a little bit. Okay, this easel allows me to hold my painting like this, but it's got two little feet down here. And it allows me to also put my board in and have it at a diagonal. So if I want my wash to be dripping that way, I can let it sit like that. If I want it to be dripping this way, I can set it up like that. And so this is an easel that I got from Dick Flicks that, a few minor adjustments on it and height adjustments, but it comes in very handy when you're working in a big piece and you need an extra pair of hands to hold it in place while it's drying. Okay, can you see my work surface again?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so let's get started. So here's my reference piece. My husband gives me roses every once in a while, and for this piece, I took a picture of some of the roses, and then I really zoomed in and cropped this very closely to get the big swirly stuff that I was after for this painting. And then sometimes for the drawing part, I will make a black and white copy. And this makes it easier for you to see the edges when you're doing your drawing. And so I use both. I'm not going to make my darks as dark as this. I actually increased the contrast on this to make it easier to see the edges, but I like the softer version of this color story. So I'm going to be working towards that. And I'm just going to do a couple of big washes on this piece, and then I'm going to zoom in so you can see more closely what I'm doing on some smaller pieces. But let me give you an idea of what I mean by doing this big wash. So first, I like to wet the area, and I've got just a tint of dirty water in here so you can see where the water is going on this. Can you guys see this, or should I move my camera in closer?
We can see it.
You can? Okay. So I'm wetting this large area with water, and you can see if I was working with a really small brush, the front part of this that I touched first would probably dry up by the time I got all the way around, which is why you need a larger tool to get this done. Now this goes all the way up here. Okay, so this is where I'm going to let my color float in. And I've actually got two overlapping petals here, and I'm just going to keep this edge soft for now. So I'm not going to put a whole lot of pigment up here, but I'm going to keep the edges soft. And I'm going to put most of my pigment in the area. And I can come back and deal with this later. I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm doing this shape, and I want this edge to be soft here. So I'm letting my water go over here, but I'm really going to be focusing on this shape right here. Okay, and I don't need to go all the way to the edge. There's a light area here on this petal And I'm leaving that dry right now. I haven't put any water there. Now, I'm working with 2 colors only on this first layer. I'm using quinacridone gold and I'm using permanent red. And the quin gold, I believe, is from Winsor Newton, and the permanent red is from Holbein. And the reason I like this permanent red from Holbein for these big washes is because it's really creamy paint and it stays wet a little bit longer. That means I can move it around a little bit longer than some other pigments. So I'm just laying this in, and I'm going to quickly get some of my red into this because I want my colors to mix on the paper. And now normally I switch brushes to put the pigment down, but I'm so nervous tonight, I didn't do that. So let me do that. I don't want as much water. I don't want as much water in my pigment. So if I use a smaller brush and load it up with pigment, I'm going to get more of what I want to fill in this wash. And now you don't want to go too slow here, which is why you use the bigger brushes and the bigger, more water, and keep it going. So I'm going to pick this up and move this around now. And actually, I want more water and more movement than what I'm getting here. So I'm going to keep adding water until I see water and pigment, until I see this going the direction I want. I'm going right over my pencil lines here. Okay, so you can see, now this takes a little patience. You can see the pigment is starting to move into this area that I wet. I hope you can see that. And now I'm going to turn this so I can get the pigment to float back down. It's going to be deeper in the bottom corner of this shape that I'm painting. So you have to do a little dance with your painting during this process. And what this does is it allows the pigment to even out in that water surface that you created when you first laid down the water wash. And then you add even more water when you add the pigment. And then you can direct the wash to where you want it to go. Now I'm seeing some bleeding right here in that area that I wet. And I see it creeping up on this. So you really have to treat this as a toddler. You can't take your eyes off of these washes while they're moving around. You have to keep them dancing right along with you. So that you end up with no brush strokes. Okay, so now I want to, I've got this in a fairly safe position. And now I'm going to come and address some of the things that I see happening here. So I don't want as much of this color here just yet. I want it to be soft, so I'm going to pick some of that up. And now I actually want to clean up this edge, soften this edge. Where I wet this, the paint crept right up to that edge. It will always do that. I have a bug in there too. Go away, bug. Body parts. And if I had clean water here, you'd see a much lighter, I'm putting tint on where I'm cleaning this up. Get rid of that bug. I've got tint in my water. I'm going to go right up to my pencil line now with clear water. or tinted water. And that's going to be a really light tint on the petal in the first layer here. And I probably won't go back over that particular area. Now I can see a little bit of a bloom here and a little bit of a blush there. And so what I'm going to do is, instead of putting my brush in there with more water, I'm going to tilt this again and see if I can get some of this to close up that gap there and there. I'm not going to add more water at this time. I'm going to try and use the water that I already have in this wash. It seems like a lot of work for one great big shape, and it kind of is, but it does work. And when we get together in the day-long workshop, it's really fun to see people dancing with their paintings. We're just softening this again. Okay, so you can see I'm getting some feathers here now. Can you see those? And so I'm going to turn my painting. This is where that easel comes in really handy. So I can turn this and manage where the pigment and the water is flowing so that I get rid of the feathers and keep that wash nice and clear in the areas. I'm looking not to get any back runs or any oozles at this stage of the game. Now I can see this is why I have smaller pieces to work on tonight as well, because this takes a little bit of patience and effort to let these set up and dry, these great big washes like this. So it's not easy to do a whole bunch of them all at one time. When we do, there's a flower that I've done in workshop in the past, and in a couple of cases we did shapes that had the pigment going the same direction, the colors forming in the same directions. And so you could try and do 2 at a time, but for the most part, this is a 1 at a time, get the paint moving and let the pigment flow and get the colors to blend in the way that you desire. So what I'm going to do is, this is still moving a bit. I'm getting a little bit of feathering here, but it is closing up. And I'm going to set this aside so that I can bring my camera closer and show you in more detail some of the other steps that I take on these paintings, so you can see all the various steps of the process. So I'm going to put this on my easel. Hopefully I won't run into any more issues with this, and I will be right back with step 2.
Okay, while Sonja is getting her stuff ready for this next place, we just wanted to reiterate that if you have any questions, to please put them in the chat, and we will ask Sonja those questions so that everybody will be able to hear both the question and the answer. Thank you.
All right. So this is the cake baking part of it. Now I have to move my camera down, so if you get vertigo easily, I apologize. Now, I might have to adjust this a little bit. Can you see this?
Yep.
Move it up.
Is that good enough?
You can move it a little bit farther upward. The other direction. There you go.
All right. All right. So, well, what I can do is this. I can move this a little closer this way. I'm set up in a condo or a living room at a new place. So everything is a little bit makeshift here tonight. Okay, so I just filled in this large shape on this one, and as you can see, I've pre-worked some of these other smaller ones, and a lot of what you do on this translates to the bigger piece when you're talking about how to manage edges, how to manage and blend colors in large washes and that sort of thing. But I think this makes it a little easier to see what's going on. I hope that that is the case for you. Now, let me get my notes here real quick. So in this phase, I want to demonstrate some of the, I wanted to demonstrate in a near view version how I did some of these washes. And so I'm going to do this corner down here so you can see again how I do this. Now there's two shapes here. A little shape in the corner, and I'm treating them both as the same shape when I'm wetting my paper. And I'm going to use lifting techniques and the thickness of my pigment, the intensity of my pigment to separate these shapes within this square. And I'm using these two colors to create my background. And I've got a little bit more of the orange color on this shape up here. And then there's some orange down here and down here. So I'm just going to put the orange in those areas. And then I'm going to take, now I'm working with fairly creamy paint. So I want you to see how thick this paint is. And that's why I keep it in this cup, so that it doesn't end up taking over my whole palette, and I can get a nice thick, you can see how much pigment is on my brush, a nice thick brush load of pigment for this. Now, many of you are used to working on smaller shapes like this when you're doing a blended wash or a graded wash. And so this may be a little bit more familiar to you, but you do the same process using the bigger tools. You just have to work with the larger tools. You have to, it's a little bit harder to manage the water and gauge the amount of water that you need when you're doing these on the big pieces. And then a lot of times people do not get enough moisture on their paper. So I'm really laying in some heavy pigment here. I don't want to have to do this twice. So if I get plenty of pigment in there and let it move around, I can probably do this once and be done. If I do it too light, I'd have to come back and do a whole nother glaze on it. And every time you go over your pigment and do another swipe at it, you risk overworking your pieces, and you also end up disturbing some of the pigment that you already have down. So now is when I do a lift. The easiest time to do a lift is when your pigment is nice and fresh like this. And so I'm just going to lift some of this off of this petal right here. And so it separates that. And I may have to do it more than one time. So that is just a little bud that's sticking out on this rose. And then it's got another little curve that is showing right here. And I'm going to put that in with just by lifting some of this pigment. And so I rinse my brush, I take the excess water off, and then I lift again. So I've got some shapes going on in this corner, and they're very subtle, and there's no hard lines, which is why I like to do this when the pigment is nice and damp. So it's going to dry a little lighter, but these are the effects that I'm looking for in this corner on this particular piece. And so this is a way you can work with really fresh color. That Queen Gold comes through. If you need to go back in, you can add a little bit in if you want it to be a little bit brighter. But if you do that, make sure you're not adding a lot of water with your brush. You really have to manage how much water you add. If I put too much water in there, it's just going to push the pigment away. And so it's really learning how much water you can have on your brush and how much pigment you can put on at any given time to manage some of these shapes. And washes without creating a lot of brush strokes. Any questions on that part? These are fairly basic things. I think we practice them a lot in classes and various things, but they really, this is a great subject to learn and practice these on as well. So, and working big and working on the very large format is a step up in terms of the challenge. So I'm going to do one more corner on this one. It's similar to what I did there. And then I want to show you how I tone some of the whites. You can see how I've saved the whites, the white edges of the petals. And I start out keeping those really bright. And the next step that I'm going to show you is how to tone those down. But let me do this other corner fairly quickly. I lost my reference, my photo reference. Here we go. So another trick that I use is if I'm turning my painting upside down to make this corner easy to access, I turn my photo reference upside down too. And that's just an easy way for you to keep yourself organized in terms of the gradations and the shadows and the shapes that you're trying to create within this form. So I am going to go all the way up to this white area right here with my wash, do this whole corner in one fell swoop. This is a great way to cover a lot of real estate in your painting very quickly. Get it nice and wet. One of the things that I see happening with students frequently is they don't ever put enough water down. They go over their painting with a brush stroke of water and they think that it's wet. But if your pigment isn't moving, it's probably not wet enough. Okay, so here we're going to go with some of the gold and let that float into these shapes. And you can move that around a little bit if you need to. And you can even pull some, if you feel like you have too much water, you can pull it out by using the tip of your brush. Now you have to create a thirsty brush. So you need to take the water out of your brush and then get it so that it pools and you can pick it up easily. And then I'm going to go get some of my red pigment, this yummy permanent red pigment. And I'm going to put it into the darkest area of this shape that I'm painting. It comes here. So I'm following some of the lines that I had in my drawing as I put this in, and then I'm going to let it move out to the edges. And in some cases, I need to add water. If it's not moving, you don't have enough water. So little thicker paint. And then pick it up and let it move. This permanent red paint from Holbein is just so creamy. I've had this tube of paint for quite a while, and it was never one of my regular picks out of my kit. And when I was getting ready to do this painting, and I'd done some other large format paintings, I started digging around into some of the reds that I didn't normally use just because I had a big supply. And I fell in love with this for this purpose. It blends and moves so beautifully. Okay, so this shape now I need to do some of the adjustments that I did on the other one. So it's a little bit lighter here. So I took a thirsty brush and picked that up. And it's a little bit lighter here. So I'm going to take a thirsty brush and pick that up. And then it's a little bit lighter here. I'll pick that up. And that corner is done. Now it's going to continue to move and it's going to continue to settle out. But basically, I don't need to fuss with this a whole lot more to make that read. So one little swipe right here to make that a little bit stronger petal. Okay, so that is the two big corner shapes. Everything else gets smaller and smaller on this, except for that big one that I just showed you on the large format piece. And so I'm going to move on from this stage to doing some of the whites. Any questions so far?
We don't yet have any questions in the chat. Again, anybody that has questions, please put them in the chat.
Yeah. Well, these are pretty basic skills in many ways. The idea of making them supersized is really, the thing. And it's very difficult in this Zoom format to do the whole large scale thing in the amount of time that we have. But I can continue to translate that for you as we go through this. So here's the next step. So this has all of the first layers filled in. You can see this is where I started, and there's some more shapes to fill in. But basically you're using that same process to create these different shapes. And I'm just using two colors throughout all of this until I get to the final details. So in this particular area, I wanted to point out that now I'm downsizing to the kinds of brushes that you might often use in classes and that sort of thing. This is a basic number 10. The one I had been working with was a 16. This was a 1/2 inch, and this was an 1.5 inches. So we're downsizing a bit as you get into smaller shapes. On this one, I wanted to point out that some of these I've already done some glazing, where this was white and then I needed to tone it, and I might need to tone it even more. It's a little bit more orange in the photo reference. Here's that great big petal that I was working on the big one, where I kept it soft, but I needed to define this edge right here. So I just let it bleed over there for the first wash. I've got some of these toned here. I've got some toned here. I have nothing toned here. So in this case, I'm going to flip this upside down so that you can see this has very little orange in it. And so I'm just going to take some of my water and dampen this and come around these dark shapes that I have. It gets pretty light here. It's pretty light on the very edge, so I'm not even going to touch the edge. And I'm just going to bring a very little amount of my pigment now. I'm just taking a very small amount, the amount that you might be used to working with on your paintings. And I'm going to drop some of this in to tone this area. And then in these areas, you'll find there's little ridges and little shapes that you can add to the painting when you get to this part that just give it a little bit more character than having all the shapes really flat.
Say, Sonja, we have a question here. And this person asks, sometimes when I try to lift paint for highlights, I get fuzzy edges. It doesn't always blend and diffuse well. Is it because the paintbrush is too wet?
If it's fuzzing out the paint, you probably have too much water on your brush. So yes, you need to make sure when you're lifting that you dry your brush out. So I rinse it, I make sure it's clean, and then I take the excess moisture out. I also keep a sponge handy so that when I'm first coming out of my wash bucket, I can take the excess water out onto the sponge. And then as to get it even cleaner, I will put it on a tissue, and that controls the amount of water in my brush very nicely for me.
Awesome. Others are asking, what are the weight of your paper?
Oh, I'm working on 140-pound arches.
Okay. And when you use the really big, the large ones as well, are they on 140?
Yes.
Okay.
That is
Thank you.
also 140. Now, I know that some people, when they go to the big size, they want to go to, I'm just adding some depth to this while it's damp here. I know that some people like to work on a 300-pound when they're working really large like that because it doesn't buckle as much. But I found that it absorbs so much pigment that I actually, I'm fine as of today working on the 140-pound. So these washes that I'm putting in, these tints are, this is where you get to dabble and doodle a little bit. And it's okay to have some of these variations in your washes and, do some decorative work. And now you're paying attention to very subtle shifts of color in a small shape as opposed to the large shapes. And I didn't put any orange in this. I might put just a tiny bit of orange over here, orange being the Quinn Gold, and then just a tiny bit more pink. So this, as long as your paper is wet, you can stay and play in these shapes for quite a period of time. However, my caution is this: when you continue to add water or pigment, you want to make sure you're not adding a lot of water, because every time you add water to this shape, it's going to push the pigments to the edge, and you don't want to get your pigments making an outline around your shape. So that is controlling how much water you have in your brush, your water to pigment ratio on your brush. So if you want to make stronger marks, you have to have creamier paint, stronger pigment on your brush, like I just put down there. And that, because it's not full of water, you see how it's not running to the edges? And it also gives me time to mess around with it. And I know a lot of us like to mess around. I like to mess around as much as anybody else. But you risk overworking it if you do too much. So just pay attention to how much water is in your brush, and so you don't flood a small shape like that. Now, there are some areas where I have really heavy pigment, and you can sometimes just drag that pigment into the shape. So this shape over here, I'm going to move away from this one for the moment. I'm going to come over here, and in some case, now this is 100% bone dry, but if I wet this and just come over that edge a little bit from that shape, and my brush is wet, but I'm not saturating it, I'm actually pulling some of the color from that shape. I don't know if you can see that. It's darkening this a little bit, and I'm just borrowing the color there. In fact, so I haven't put any extra pigment on my brush. So if you want to make a really subtle transition, you can do that. Just be really careful you don't go too far into the neighboring shape. So that's another way that I sometimes tint these edges, is just to borrow some pigment from the local area. Now this one's pretty light, but it needs it's too bright. It looks like it's unfinished. So I'm just going to get up on my tippy toes on my brush here and put a little bit of water down. And then I'm going to get just a little bit of pigment on my brush and just up on my tippy toes, let that drop in. And it just modifies it enough. So it doesn't look like it's an afterthought, even though they look like they're white when you first start the painting, they're actually not white. And but it's really easy to fill them in just like that. This one right here, it's a little darker than what I have. So I'll do that one. So this is, you're assessing at this stage of the game, you're assessing. Now I'm borrowing some pigment from this segment right there. And just by touching it, I'm dragging some of that pigment in. It might be enough. And if it's not, just go get a little lick of color on your brush and tone it in. So very light touch, very simple little adjustments. So any questions on this glazing part? I'm basically adding glazes. Well, I'm not really glazing yet. I'm tinting some of these light areas. In the next stage, I'll be putting down some darks and doing some tinting there. So how much time do we have left? About 10 minutes or so?
Yeah, about 10 minutes would be great.
All right, so I think I'll skip doing this one. You can see there are other pieces that are going to need attention here, but I just wanted to show you how you could borrow from your previous washes and just a light touch to go in and tint some of those lights is a second part of the process. So then when you get to the final part of the process, and I'm going to put these side by side so you can see the difference. This is one where I was just working on the tints. Here's one where I was starting to lay in the basic washes. And now here is we're starting to add the darks. And in this case, this is the first time I'm adding additional color, because my red, I've gone as strong as my red can go anywhere here. I've reached the full mass spectrum of that color. And so I'm going to shift, get my palette over here. And I'm going to use some alizarin crimson, which is a darker red. Actually, I don't know if I'll move this like this. Can you see this?
Yes.
Can you see my palette? Okay.
Oh, no,
So,
we can't see your palette. I'm sorry. We can only see your picture.
all right, so let me just see. It's not that important. I can just bring it over here temporarily. So I'm using some alizarin crimson. This is more like out of my traditional palette. This is a darker red. And I'm also going to use a little bit of Payton's Gray. I know some of you hear me say how infrequently I use Payton's Gray, but in this case, I'm going to use some Payton's Gray. And now I want to add in some darker details, and I've put a few in here so you can see the impact that they have. There's a dark shadow in here. There's a dark shadow in here. There's one over here that I think just really helps you finish the piece. So the values in this end up being very important. Even though we look like we're just doing some nice fun washes, the value shapes really help tell the story. And I might even want to go down to a smaller size brush, but for time purposes, I'm going to come in here and put in this dark shape that I have right here. And I'm painting wet on dry right now. I did not wet this ahead of time, because I don't want to dilute my pigments, I'm going to soften this edge just by bringing the water up close to it. And that's going to pull that pigment in to create a shadow space in that petal. And it also needs a shadow on the other side. So I'm going to dampen this side as well. And so I have water in my brush, but it's not dripping. And I'm just touching that wet pigment and allowing it to ease into that shape. So that creates a little depth back there. And I might want to pull some of this pigment up just a little bit further. Now, when I'm mixing alizarin crimson and Payne's gray, it doesn't behave as well as the permanent red does. So it gets a little bit fussier to move around. I don't know if it's just the way the two pigments interact, but you have to watch it a little bit more carefully. And so I'm turning this just to let it move before I move on to the next shape. I'm going to correct the shape just a tiny bit, and I took the excess water out of my brush to do that. Okay, so then I wanted to deepen this area right here. I want to make this a darker color. And because it's a bigger shape, I am going to wet this first and give myself a little bit of runway for this dark. And this will probably be the last little accent that I'll put on here before our time is up tonight. So there's a deep little V there, not a V, but almost like a line. And then this shape right here. And I've got very strong, dark pigment. Keep in mind, it'll dry lighter. But now I want to soften this. And I find it's easier to soften this if I see where the point of my brush is. As opposed to where the belly of the brush is. I don't have to be quite as careful about where the belly of the brush is. And then this side of the line bleeds into this petal. So I'll soften that edge. So it's soft on one side of the shape, soft on this side of the shape, hard on this side of the shape, and it's the opposite when it gets down here. So when you're working on these petals, it's very important to know how to make both your hard edges against the dry surface and then soften the edges so that you get those folds and those bends and those shapes. So that is how I would treat that area. And I can see a little line here. So I'm where I wet it. And so I'm going to take care of that before I close out. Little line right here. I think my water is a little dirty. So you can touch this up, just don't touch it very much. Okay. So I could also darken this area. There are some other pieces where I can darken, but basically that's the whole process and how I would approach this. Then finally, there is a dark, it looks a little darker on my reference down here. And I did this in one wash, the way I showed you earlier. If I, this is where you make a judgment call if you decide you want to go back and put more color in there or not. In this case, I probably won't, but it would make a difference to me after I put this shape in and this shape in. I might go, yeah, I really do need to go and put a little bit of this darker wash in. So that's basically that's basically the demo. I do want to say hi, and I'm going to turn the camera up so I can see you all. I had another device hooked up tonight so I could see you and do the demo, and it wasn't working, so I apologize for that. But I wanted to let you know that if you do want to do this, if you do want to do a workshop, there's one coming up at the Minnetonka Center for the Arts. It's May 18th. And I don't think that's published yet, but if you're interested, you can put that in your tickler and we'll do the whole big piece. So thank you. And let me know if you have any other questions.
Thank you so much, Sonja. This was just really wonderful. It was very, very fun. And I think that even just a little tips right at the end, just adding that Payne's gray, just kind of just turned the whole thing, just gave you so much more dimension. It just was really fun. It was very fun to watch. You're getting a lot of thank yous, a wonderful
you,
demo.
Sonja.
We really appreciate having you here. So thank you again. And everybody, if you want, again, like Sonja said, come to her class May 18th at Minnetonka Center for the Arts. It would be really great to see everybody there.
Thank you,
All right.
Sonja.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.